I'm 33, male, and currently a manager at a mid-sized tech company. I'm not the flashy, overnight success type. I work my way up one step at a time. Back when I was in my early 20s, though, I wasn't anywhere near where I am now. In fact, I was struggling. I had just finished college, was drowning in student loans, and got laid off from my first job when the company downsized. It was during that low point in my life that my brother-in-law, D, decided it was his personal mission to make my life even worse. D had married my older sister a couple of years earlier. He's the kind of guy who flaunts his success like a badge of honor. D made good money in real estate, and he made sure everyone knew about it. New cars, flashy watches, an ego bigger than the house. He constantly bragged about buying outright. Back then, he used to love playfully mocking me in front of the family during gatherings, although it felt far from playful to me. "You're still living with your mom and dad, huh? Must be nice not having bills. Oh wait, you'd actually need a job for that." He'd joke loudly over dinner, followed by his obnoxious laugh. My parents would chuckle nervously, and my sister? She just sat there, pretending not to notice. Dean never missed an opportunity to remind me that I wasn't pulling my weight in life. What really stung, though, was one specific Thanksgiving dinner. I had finally managed to land a job. Nothing glamorous, just something to start paying off my loans. I was sharing the good news, excited for a fresh start, when D cut in. "So what's the big plan, man?" "Work a dead-end job, eat mom and dad's food, and coast through life." He smirked, shoving a piece of turkey in his mouth. Then, leaning back in his chair, he added, "Don't worry. Maybe one day when you grow up, you can come work for me. I always need cheap labor." My parents laughed awkwardly again. My sister avoided eye contact, and I just sat there, swallowing my anger. That night, I decided two things. One, I'd cut him out of my life as much as possible. And two, I'd never, ever let anyone talk to me like that again. The next few years weren't easy, but they were worth it. I took that dead-end job and used it to springboard into better opportunities. I taught myself coding at night, eventually landing a role in tech. I worked my way up, one promotion at a time. By my late 20s, I was finally earning enough to pay off my loans and move into my own place. I still had a CD at family gatherings, but I kept things polite and distant. It wasn't until a couple of years ago that fate decided to turn the tables in a way I never could have imagined. By this point, I was working in my current company, a rapidly growing tech firm that had recently announced plans to expand into real estate management software. I was promoted to lead one of the new divisions, tasked with overseeing recruitment and operations. That's when D's name showed up on a list of job applicants. I'll admit, at first, I thought it was some kind of mistake or joke. But there it was, his full name, resume, and cover letter, sent in like he was just another candidate. Apparently, the real estate market hadn't been kind to him lately. His flashy lifestyle had caught up to him, and the downer had left him scrambling. Gone were the sports cars and designer watches. His resume painted a very different picture. He was desperate for a stable paycheck, and our company's expansion was one of the few lifelines in town. I could have rejected his application outright, but where's the fun in that? I decided to play it professionally. I passed his resume along to HR with a note saying he had relevant experience, and we scheduled an interview. When he walked into the room and saw me sitting there, his face turned pale. Hey, he stammered, trying to recover. "Didn't realize you worked here." "Not just work here," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I'm leading this division." The interview was awkward, to say the least. He tried to play up his qualifications, but I could tell he was sweating. He probably assumed I'd hold a grudge, and honestly, he wasn't wrong. But I wasn't going to make it that easy for him. After all, he had taught me a lot about how much it sucks to be humiliated. To everyone's surprise, including his, I recommended we hire him. Not out of kindness, though. No, I had bigger plans. Once D was officially part of the company, I made sure his onboarding was as thorough as possible. I wasn't going to cut him any slack. Every project, every deadline, every minor mistake, he was held accountable, just like any other employee. Actually, no, not just like any other employee. I held him to higher standards. After all, he was the guy who used to mock me for being broke and jobless. Surely, someone like him could handle a little extra pressure, right? At first, D could try to act like everything was fine. He avoided me as much as he could, and stuck to the tasks assigned to him. But it didn't take long for his entitled streak to resurface. One day, he barged into my office without knocking. "Look," he began, "I've been here for a couple of months now, and I think we both know I'm overqualified for what I'm doing. Don't you think it's time I moved up to something more appropriate?" I leaned back in my chair, trying not to smirk. "Overqualified? D, you were hired as a project coordinator because that's what your resume supports. Promotions are earned here, not handed out." His face twitched slightly. "Come on, man. You know I've got experience. I could be doing way more for the company if you gave me a shot." I kept my tone calm but firm. "Then prove it. Until then, stick to your role." He left my office, clearly irritated. But instead of stepping up, D began pulling some of his old tricks. He started trying to buddy up to other team leads, bypassing me whenever possible. He'd drop hints in meetings about his extensive experience or claim credit for other people's work. When that didn't get him anywhere, he switched tactics. One day, HR called me into their office. Apparently, D had filed a formal complaint against me, claiming I was being overly critical and creating a hostile work environment. I couldn't help but laugh when I heard it. "He's claiming you're singling him out," the HR manager explained. "He says you're retaliating against him for personal reasons." I took a deep breath and laid it all out. I showed them detailed records of every interaction I'd had with D, every email, every performance review, every documented incident where he tried to manipulate or undermine his colleagues. I made it clear that my treatment of him was entirely professional, and if anything, I'd gone out of my way to give him opportunities to succeed. HR quickly saw through his act, but the complaint wasn't without consequences. It triggered an internal review of our division, which meant more work for me and my team. I was furious. D, on the other hand, walked around the office like he'd won some kind of victory. That was the final straw. I decided it was time to take off the gloves. First, I started documenting everything even more meticulously than before. Every missed deadline, every unprofessional comment, every attempt he made to pass off someone else's work as his own. I kept a record. Then, I began assigning him projects that I knew were slightly beyond his capabilities. Nothing impossible, just enough to push him out of his comfort zone. And when he inevitably failed to deliver, I made sure it was noted in his performance reviews. But I didn't stop there. I also reached out to the other team leads, asking for their honest feedback on D's performance. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who had issues with him. Several of them reported that he was difficult to work with, took shortcuts, and had a tendency to blame others when things went wrong. All of this went into a comprehensive report I compiled and sent to upper management. Meanwhile, D seemed oblivious to the storm that was brewing. He continued strutting around the office, trying to impress people with his stories about how successful he used to be. He even started dropping hints that he might move on to something bigger soon, as if he was doing us a favor by sticking around. Then came the quarterly review meeting. Upper management called him in, along with me, to discuss his performance. I'll never forget the look on his face when they laid out everything from the report. Missed deadlines, poor teamwork, questionable ethics. It was all there in black and white. "This doesn't reflect the standards we expect from our employees," the VP said firmly. "We're going to have to let you go." D turned to me, panic in his eyes. Wait, can we talk about this?" "Privately," he stammered. The VP shook her head. "The decision has already been made." After the meeting, D cornered me in the hallway. He was practically begging. "Come on, man," he said, his voice trembling. "You can't let this happen. I've got a family to support. You know how hard things have been for me lately." I folded my arms, meeting his gaze. "And how many times did you mock me when I was struggling, D? How many times did you rub your success in my face while I was trying to get back on my feet?" He opened his mouth to respond, but closed it again, realizing there was nothing he could say. "This isn't personal," I continued. "This is about your performance. And frankly, you've earned this." With that, I walked away, leaving him standing there speechless. A few weeks later, my sister called me. Apparently, D had been struggling to find work since getting fired. His reputation in the industry had taken a hit, and word had gotten around about his behavior. She asked if there was anything I could do to help him. "I think he's had enough," she said quietly. "He's learned his lesson." I thought about it for a moment, but decided to hold my ground. "He's an adult," I replied. It's time he takes responsibility for his actions. To this day, I don't regret how I handled the situation. D had spent years tearing me down, but when the tables turned, he couldn't handle the heat. Sometimes karma doesn't need any help. It just needs a little push. If you enjoyed this story of well-earned karma, you know what to do. Stick around, because there's always more where this came from.